It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up. The kind of quiet that only exists near the ocean in the dead of night filled the room. Heavy, still, and almost sacred. Moonlight spilled through my window, brushing across my bedsheets. My body was warm under the covers. I sat up, wrapped myself in my robe, and stepped into the hallway. My feet moved before my mind caught up, guided more by instinct than intention. I paused in front of the side door, the one that leads to the guest house. It was slightly open, not wide, just enough to tempt, enough to let the air whisper through. I pushed it open, and there he was, Elian, 24, quiet, from Brooklyn, tattooed fingers, eyes too old for his age, a boy who didn't talk much, but painted like he was trying to remember God. He was leaning over a canvas, barefoot, shirtless, the muscles of his back shifting as his brush moved. There was music playing low, some instrumental loop humming from an old speaker in the corner. And in front of him was me, not clothed, not posed, just me, sleeping, my hair curled against the pillow, my skin bathed in the same moonlight that had just touched my own sheets. He'd painted me from memory. I don't know how long I stood there watching. His brush paused, then lowered, and slowly Elian turned to face me. But there was no panic in his eyes, no shame, only reverence, like a man looking at something sacred, like he was afraid to speak in case the moment shattered. I remember whispering, more breath than sound, "You were watching me?" And he answered quietly, "No, I was seeing you." That was the first time I felt it, the tremble in my knees, the ache in my chest that wasn't grief, but something else, something waking. I'm Ava, 55, a widow for 6 years. I live alone on the edge of Rockport, Maine, in a cottage my late husband and I built from the ground up. He was the only man I ever thought I'd love, the only one who ever looked at me like I was worth building a life around. Until Elian moved in. He'd answered my ad for a short-term tenant, an artist looking for quiet. He came with a duffel bag full of brushes, paints, and something broken behind his eyes. I told myself I was just giving him a place to heal, that I was doing a kind thing. But now I wonder if he came to heal me instead. He never asked to paint me. He never even looked at me like that. Until that night. Until I saw myself on his canvas and realized he'd been seeing me all along. Seeing the lines, the loneliness, the longing I'd buried under polite smiles and quiet mornings. He painted what no one else noticed anymore. And for a moment, I forgot I was a woman twice his age. I forgot I was supposed to feel ashamed. I forgot everything, except how his eyes held me still. I didn't know whether to run or step closer, whether to scold him or ask to see more. I backed away slowly, breath shallow, pulse in my throat. The door creaked in my hand. I hovered between worlds. One foot in the safety of what I knew, the other pointed toward the fire I didn't. Should I shut the door or walk in? I tried to pretend it hadn't happened, that I didn't walk in on a younger man painting me, bare, sleeping, vulnerable, that his eyes hadn't stripped away the dust that had settled on my soul for years. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at me, like I was something holy. The next evening, I found another painting, leaning softly against my door. It was me again, but this time, I was smiling. Only, I didn't remember smiling. I stood there staring, robe clutched tight around my body, heart thudding. Then I heard a knock. I opened the door, and there he was, Elian, quiet as always, holding a bottle of red wine, eyes unreadable, lips slightly parted like he had something to say and nothing to say at once. He didn't speak at first. Just walked in, poured 2 glasses, handed me one. We sat in the dim silence of my living room, fire crackling low. The space between us felt like a live wire. Then he turned toward me and whispered, "Can I paint you? When you're actually awake?" I stared at him, and I nodded, not with words, but with a slow, aching kind of yes that came from somewhere deep inside my chest. A week later, I found myself standing in the guest house again. This time deliberately. This time for him. I wore a thin robe barely tied. He set up his easel, adjusted the light. The room smelled like oil paint, linen, and something new. Something stirring. He didn't tell me to take it off. He just looked at me. And something in the way he looked made me want to unravel. So I did. The robe fell. The cool air kissed my skin. His eyes darkened, then softened, then stopped blinking altogether. He picked up the brush, touched it to the canvas, then paused. He walked toward me, fingers still stained in color, trembling slightly. He reached out, not with his brush, but with his hand. First, his fingertips touched my shoulder, featherlight. Then they brushed down my collarbone, so slowly I almost forgot to breathe. His hand slid behind my neck, and I leaned into it like I'd been waiting for that exact touch for years. When he kissed me, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't hungry. It was reverent, like his mouth had found the place it belonged. He traced the curve of my jaw with his lips, then down over my chest. My head fell back, and I gasped because his mouth made me feel alive again. His hands found my hips, drew me closer, and when he lifted me gently, carried me to the small couch near the window, it was like being weightless. What we did next wasn't just physical. It was art. It was release. Every part of my body that had gone untouched for so long remembered what it meant to feel wanted. Each time his body moved with mine, I felt something inside me break, but not in a painful way. It was like grief uncoiling, like sorrow letting go, like I wasn't a widow anymore. I was a woman being loved. When it was over, we stayed tangled, skin to skin, my cheek against his chest, his breath soft against my hair. I remember thinking, maybe this is what healing feels like. But just as the light outside turned blue with early morning, there was a knock on the main house door. I froze, pulled the blanket tighter, and then I heard her voice. Mom, my daughter, unannounced. My heart stopped. I didn't ask questions after that first night, because some answers ruin the magic. And what we had felt too fragile to be named. My daughter left that morning, coffee barely finished, suitcase rolling behind her. She never saw Elian step out from the guest house. Never noticed the second mug on my kitchen shelf. Never suspected that I had just made love to a man 30 years younger, with paint still drying on his fingers. After she left, I kept Elian hidden. Or maybe I kept myself hidden with him. We stayed behind drawn curtains and unspoken rules. He didn't return to his canvases. Instead, he studied me, like I was his new medium. He helped around the house, fixing the shutters that always banged too loud in the wind, lining my porch with candles I didn't know I had. He even cooked, bare-chested, barefoot, humming old soul music while stirring risotto. One night, I sat before the fireplace with a glass of brandy and years of grief. He knelt behind me, took the brush from my lap. Not a painting brush, but the one I used to smooth my hair before bed. And he ran it gently through my curls, slowly, reverently, as if brushing me was an act of worship. I didn't say a word. Not when he pressed a kiss to the back of my neck. Not when his hand slid down my shoulder, over the satin of my nightgown. Not even when he whispered, "You don't need to ask me why I came here. You only need to know how I see you." And I turned my head slightly, just enough to see his eyes catch the firelight. "What do you see, Elian?" His lips barely moved. "Like I've been waiting to meet you in every lifetime." I couldn't breathe after that. Only feel. He kissed me from behind, slow and open-mouthed. His hand slipped under my nightgown. He touched me like he knew where I was empty and how to fill it. And when he turned me around and lifted me onto the kitchen counter, it wasn't lust. It was longing, finally finding a home. His lips were warm from wine. His hands were rough, kneading. They ran up my thighs, spreading them apart like a secret. I gasped, arching into him. He entered me gently, not like a man claiming something, but like someone returning to a place he had always belonged. I held him there, wrapped my legs around his waist. I whispered his name, soft, trembling, as my head tilted back and my whole body surrendered. I think I cried that night, not out of pain, but out of the strange ache of feeling alive again, of remembering what it felt like to be seen, not just looked at. And afterward, he didn't pull away. He kissed the corner of my mouth, brushed the sweat from my brow with the back of his hand. Then he said something that made my heart pause. I lied about something. I turned to him, breath still shaky. What? But he stopped. His jaw tensed. His eyes dropped to the floor. I'll tell you, just not tonight. And he kissed me again, slower this time, like an apology or a goodbye. But I didn't ask, because I was too afraid of what truth might take this away. Before I tell you what Elian almost confessed that night, can I ask you something? Have you ever felt a love so unexpected, so forbidden, that it unraveled you completely? If this story is touching something inside you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Tap the like button if you've ever been torn between right and real. And if you're still listening, hit subscribe. Because the rest of this story, it only gets deeper. He told me 3 days later. The fire had gone low. My body was still tangled in a blanket he'd wrapped me in hours ago. And his voice, it cut through the silence like a secret long overdue. He didn't come to Maine because he needed space, or to paint, or even to run from something. He came for me. I looked at him confused, but he didn't blink. He told me my husband, his father's mentor, used to speak of me, said I was the most graceful woman he'd ever met, said I moved like grief had taught me how to be still and gentle, that I held sorrow like silk in my hands. There were letters, photos, a single story that stayed with him all his life, of a woman in Maine who never stopped loving. And Elian, he whispered, I needed to see if the woman in the stories was real, if maybe you were waiting too. I didn't know whether to be furious or flattered, but I knew I didn't want him to stop looking at me the way he did. So that night, I didn't ask more questions. We didn't speak at all. He kissed me as if words would ruin it, like we'd already said everything with our eyes in the days before. He unclasped my bra like it was the lock on my past. And when it fell away, he didn't look at me like a lover would. He looked at me like a man reclaiming something the world thought had withered. His mouth found the curve of my chest, not as hunger, but honor. He kissed every inch with a patience that made me weep quietly. It felt like he was gathering the woman I used to be in his mouth, and stitching her back into me with each touch. And when he finally reached between my thighs, his hand didn't grope or grab. It listened. It learned me. It made me whisper his name in a way that didn't feel sinful. It felt sacred. He slid inside me with the slowest rhythm, like he was afraid to break what we'd built, like every inch he claimed was a promise he wouldn't take back. I wrapped my legs around his waist and held his face close. He looked at me as he moved in me, eyes full of something fierce and breaking. And I cried, not because of pain, not from shame. I cried because something inside me was being born again, and it was him who brought me back. We didn't make love like strangers. We made love like we'd met in every lifetime, but never found the right moment. Until this one. And that moment, that hour beneath the hush of the cabin walls and the storm outside. It was everything we had been aching toward. But the next morning, the bed was cold. I searched the rooms, called his name in a whisper, checked the studio. Elian was gone. No note, no brushstroke left on canvas. Just the memory of a man who came into my life like a tide I didn't know I'd been waiting for, and slipped away just as quietly. And I sat at the shore that morning, wrapped in the same blanket he once held me in, watching the waves rise and fall like the ache in my chest. He didn't come back that night, or the next, but strangely, he didn't have to, because on the third morning, while the sun was brushing gold across the pine trees, I heard a knock on the studio door. A courier stood there, smiling like he knew something I didn't, and in his hands a package wrapped in brown parchment tied with twine. My hands trembled as I untied it, and when I saw what was inside, I forgot how to breathe. A portrait of me, not naked, not crying, not broken. I was standing tall, in that old blue linen dress I always wore when painting, head tilted, eyes alive, a soft, knowing smile on my lips. He didn't paint me like I was grieving. He painted me like I was beginning. And on the back, in his gentle, looping handwriting, he wrote, "You were my favorite subject, but not even my brush could capture how you made me feel." I pressed my lips to that message, held it to my chest, and for the first time in years, I wept, not from loss, but from something I hadn't felt in so long, belonging. I placed the painting on the eastern wall of my studio, and every morning since, I stand in front of it, coffee in hand, sunlight on my face, not to remember him, but to remember her, the woman he saw in me, the woman I forgot I could be. Some people don't enter your life to stay. They come to remind you that you're still alive, that you're still art, still worthy of being seen, touched, loved. Have you ever felt a love so unexpected, so forbidden, that it unraveled you completely? If this story is touching something inside you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Tap the like button if you've ever been torn between right and real. And if you're still listening, hit subscribe.